Sometimes strange events happen in the most ordinary places, in apartments, on roads, or even on public transport. I have collected for you the stories of people who have encountered the inexplicable. Enjoy the watch.
I'm writing this and I can't believe it's even possible. My boyfriend and I finally decided to live together. His parents offered us the apartment where his grandmother used to live. She, by the way, passed away recently. I must say, she was a rather unpleasant woman, and to put it mildly, she didn't like me. Even though I only saw her twice, once on New Year's and once on his mom's birthday. My boyfriend's family always celebrates holidays with relatives. So after we moved in, my sanity just started to crumble. My boyfriend works as a middle manager, and I've always worked remotely, which is from home. And when he left for work, all sorts of bizarre things would start happening to me. At first, I would briefly notice a shadow that darted into the kitchen, but I always thought I was just imagining it. One day, right in the middle of the afternoon, I heard something fall in the next room. I went in and saw a painting lying in the middle of the room, but I didn't pay much attention to that either. But my boyfriend, when he came home, said it was very strange because the nail it was hanging on was still in the wall, and it couldn't have fallen by itself. But unfortunately, that wasn't all. One day, when my beloved had already returned from work, I went to take a shower. Just then, someone rang our doorbell. He opened it, yelled that he'd be right back, that he needed to move his car. It turned out someone had boxed in a neighbor, and he couldn't get out. My boyfriend had to move his car so the neighbor could get out. At that moment, when he had stepped out, I tried to get out of the bathroom, but the door wouldn't open. Just so you know, our latch is on the inside of the bathroom, and you can't lock it from the outside. That very same grandmother lived there, and as far as I suspect, it never locked at all. I pushed the door, but it was stuck as if it was cemented shut. I hit it, but it didn't budge. I yelled for my boyfriend, but there was silence in response. I remembered he had gone outside, and I didn't have my phone in the bathroom to call him. I angrily kicked the door again, but it was useless. It was as if someone was holding it from the outside. A slight panic began to set in. I tried to calm myself down, thinking my boyfriend would come back and open this cursed door. I sat on the edge of the tub and was just flabbergasted. The door opened on its own. I flew out of the bathroom, and at that very minute, my boyfriend walked in. To say I was in shock is an understatement. How is something like that even possible? And don't tell me I was seeing things. I saw everything perfectly.
In 1978, a group of young people from Montana claimed to have encountered an inexplicable and frightening phenomenon. According to them, it all happened during one of their frequent trips to abandoned places. They often explored deserted settlements. In their words, it was part of their hobby. One summer evening, they headed to an old farmhouse, long abandoned and surrounded by tall weeds. As they walked through the deserted field, the kids noticed something strange. A few dozen meters away, a person was standing. He was unusually tall and incredibly thin. His figure seemed unnaturally elongated. His arms in particular stood out, long and thin like an insect's, with unnaturally long fingers hanging at his sides. He was just standing there, looking at them. But suddenly, the figure started approaching rapidly. According to the group members, it had pale, almost grayish skin, and its face was so blurred that it was hard to make out its features. It moved in a jerky, uneven way, not at all like a normal person. The young people panicked and rushed back to the car, but suddenly they heard a desperate cry from one of their friends behind them. When they turned around, they no longer saw anyone. Their friend had simply vanished. Later, after searching the scene, the police found nothing. There were no signs of a struggle or blood. All the group members were taken for a medical examination, but no alcohol or drugs were found in their systems. They were in full possession of their senses. Unfortunately, the missing young man was never found.
This story was told to me by my mother. She was little at the time, and she and my grandmother went to a neighboring village to visit relatives. From her words, we arrived at the bus stop. Buses didn't run as often back then. We stood there, waiting, but there was still no bus, even though it should have already been there according to the schedule. Besides them, there were two other guys who were a little drunk at the stop. My grandmother knew them. They lived in that village. Finally, a bus arrived, but for some reason, it wasn't the usual one. It looked quite unfamiliar, but we didn't know much about bus models and just thought it had been replaced. To my grandmother's surprise, no one got off at the stop, although usually at least a few people would get off here. Inside, the cabin light was dimly glowing with a strange blue color, and maybe it was just me, but the inside of the bus was clearly bigger than the outside. There were no other passengers in the bus besides my mom, my grandmother, and those two guys. My grandmother asked the driver if the bus was going to the right village. The driver looked at her strangely and seemed to nod. The road that led to the neighboring village was the only one, and there was nowhere to turn off. No matter how you drove, you would end up in the next village, and then the same road would lead to the city. They got on and left. The two guys were sitting in the front. At some point, we started to notice that it was unusually dark outside the window. Although when we got on, it was daytime, and we had only been on the road for a maximum of 10 minutes. A couple more minutes passed, the bus stopped, and something strange came into the cabin. It was a being in an old, long coat. At that very moment, my grandmother grabbed me by the hand and pulled me towards the exit, yelling at the driver that we were getting off. Passing the guys, my grandmother told them, "Guys, get up, this isn't the right bus." But they just said, "Why are you yelling? Get out of here!" My grandmother pulled me out of the bus. I stood by the door and didn't understand what was happening. And my grandmother yelled into the open door, "Guys, please, you need to get out!" But the door closed and the bus drove away. We were standing in the middle of an unknown road. And my mom asked, bewildered, what that was. My grandmother reluctantly said that she noticed it wasn't the right road. And only several years later did she admit that when the being got on, my grandmother saw that it had no legs. It was as if it was floating. Frightened, she pulled me out and tried to save the guys, but she was afraid to talk about the legs, thinking that we would all disappear if she did. We ended up 20 kilometers from the village we were going to. Although I repeat, it was impossible to drive past it. There was only one road leading to it, the one we were on. And how we got so far in such a short time, I don't know. But unfortunately, that wasn't all. One of the guys was later found. It turned out he had drowned in a river not far from that village, and the other one disappeared without a trace. My mom has no idea what that bus was, or what happened to the other guy.
My story might seem a little strange, maybe even crazy, but I swear I saw something that gave me goosebumps. I work as a taxi driver, mostly at night. It's easier for me that way. I don't like being in traffic jams. So, a couple of days ago, I took a client to the outskirts of the city. I was sitting in my car, waiting for a new order, but there weren't many that night. I decided to get out and have a cigarette because I never smoke in the car. I had just taken a puff when I suddenly heard a child's heart-wrenching scream fill the street. It was such a desperate, horror-filled scream that it sent shivers down my spine. I'm not a hero, of course, but it was simply impossible to ignore a sound like that, especially since it was night and I decided to check it out. I quickly jumped back into the car, started the engine, and drove in the direction of the scream. The last of the city's buildings ended there. And then I was stunned. A child was standing right on the side of the road. He looked about 12, 15 years old. But the scariest thing was that he was transparent. I could see the outline of the bushes through him. He was standing completely still and just staring into the void. It was so unnatural and frightening that I decided to leave immediately. My heart was pounding like crazy. I made a sharp U-turn right in the middle of the road and hit the gas. Time passed and I started to forget about it. But just a couple of days later, I picked up a client with an address in the next building. And as I drove past that very spot,
my gaze fell on the roadside. There was a small wooden cross there. I am absolutely sure it wasn't there just a couple of days ago when I saw that child. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but I still can't stop thinking about it. Something must have happened there recently. It was quite sad and at the same time terrifying to realize what had happened.
I want to share a creepy story that happened to me and my son a couple of years ago. I'm a passionate fisherman, as my wife says, crazy about it. I went fishing almost every weekend, and my son, who was already 17, also fell in love with it. We mostly went to private lakes, where there's always plenty of fish. But lately, the owner of the lakes started raising prices a lot and liked to lower the water level. And when you change the water level too much, the fish don't bite as well. So there hadn't been much biting lately, and I decided to go to a regular lake for an overnight trip. I found a small one on the map, figured it wasn't too far away, and we went. The road was broken, it was a wilderness all around, not a soul in sight. We quickly set up our gear, cast our rods, and pitched the tent. The evening was quite peaceful. When it got completely dark, we ate, and my son went to sleep in the tent while I decided to fish a little longer. I put glow sticks on the bobbers. These are glowing attachments so you can see when the fish bite at night. I was sitting, watching the bobber, and suddenly I heard my son's voice. I turned around, but no one was there. I went to the tent, looked inside, and he was sleeping soundly. I lightly nudged him and said, "Why did you call?" He replied sleepily, "I didn't call anyone." I thought I had imagined it and went back to fishing. By my actions, I woke him up, and a couple of minutes later he joined me. We had a night light hanging in the tent, a small bulb to keep it lit inside. My son came and sat next to me, and we were fishing. At some point, I told him, "Turn off the night light in the tent." I glanced at it and couldn't believe my eyes. Judging by the outline, someone was sitting inside. I yelled, "Who's there?" And the shadow disappeared. I told my son, "Pack up the gear," and went to the tent myself. I turned on all the flashlights we had, quickly rolled up the tent, and threw it in the trunk. I didn't tell my son that I had heard his voice while he was sleeping. I didn't want to scare him. I don't know what it was, but I haven't been back there since. I'm fine at the private lake.
In an old coal mine in Wales, local miners often complained about inexplicable sounds. They claimed that they were not the creaking of supports or equipment noise, but distinct scratching sounds coming from the distant dead ends. But for a long time, no one took it seriously. The story that happened to one miner who found himself alone after a small collapse became especially eerie. Some of the workers died under the rubble, but the man managed to survive. He claimed to have seen small, hunched figures flitting in the distance. According to him, they were short, with pale skin, and they moved quite fast. At some point, they began to watch him intently, and one of them started to approach. As the man recounted, he began to yell at them not to come closer, and the figure froze. Also, according to him, after watching him for a bit, they disappeared around a corner. He was convinced that they were not ghosts, but something else entirely. He was able to wait for help, and he was rescued later that night. After that incident, he never went down into the mine again, and flat out refused to continue working.
You'll probably think I'm crazy, but maybe this will help someone. I'll start by saying that my friend almost died recently. It was 5 months ago. My friend, let's call her Allah, took a husband from his family. She was a very beautiful girl, and guys often flirted with her. It so happened that she met a man at her workplace. He often visited there. Soon, they started dating. He was older than her and quite wealthy, but he also had a family and a small child. At some point, the man's wife even started calling her, demanding that she leave her husband alone. But Allah was a pretty flighty girl, and at first said she didn't know what the wife was talking about. And in the end, she told the wife to get lost. As time went on, the man gave her expensive gifts, and as far as I know, promised to leave his wife and marry Allah. She was beyond happy, but at some point, something happened. Allah suddenly started getting sick, and the man cut off all communication with her and told her not to call him. This is where the strange things start. My friend literally couldn't get rid of her illnesses. She was constantly sick, complaining of headaches. She asked me to stay with her while she was sick. It was the first time I had ever heard such a request from her. She had never asked me to come over when she was sick before. But we were quite close friends, and I agreed, but on the condition that I would bring my cat, because I had no one to leave him with. After all, I live alone in this city and rent a room. She said, "Bring whoever you want, just come." My friend was a pretty well-off girl and already had her own apartment at 32. I had already gotten used to her constantly complaining about headaches, but one day she confessed that someone had been strangling her at night, but she couldn't see anyone. It was only when she started to say the Our Father prayer that everything went away. And as it turned out, that's why she invited me to stay with her. I had been staying with her for 2 days, and one day, walking past the closet in the hallway, I noticed something strange. There was a mirror on the closet doors in the hallway, and it seemed to me that I saw a black shadow in the reflection. Naturally, I told her about it. That same evening, we covered it with a cloth, but my cat had been acting strange the whole time. He was constantly hiding behind the couch or on the balcony, and in those rare moments when he came out, he would stare at one spot where there was nothing. He rarely walked around the apartment calmly. He mostly ran. He would quickly run through the corridor and hide behind the couch where he would sit all evening. This was not at all like him. He is a very calm cat. My friend and I slept in separate rooms, and one night when my friend was already asleep, I was watching a TV series on my phone when I suddenly heard distinct, heavy footsteps in the corridor. I got up, checked, and no one was there. I lay back down, and just as I was falling asleep, I heard a muffled scream from my friend's room. I ran in, and I was paralyzed. Something black and small was sitting on her and strangling her. I don't know how I managed to pull myself together, but I was able to reach out and turn on the light. At that very minute, the thing disappeared. My friend was sitting there with tears in her eyes and praying. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and perhaps it will seem strange, but we decided to go see a psychic. We searched for a long time, but finally found one woman in the city and went there. I didn't go in to see the psychic. They said only one person should go in. My friend later told me that as soon as she walked in, the woman said, "You are doing something bad. You cannot take other people's husbands." In short, she performed some kind of ritual, gave her a talisman, and told her to look for needles in her door or door frame, which she should first burn and then throw away at a crossroads, and to look for a red thread near the doorstep in the house, to which something would be tied. She needed to also burn that and throw the ashes away at that same crossroads. Imagine our surprise when we found needles stuck between the door frame and the wall of the front door, and a red thread was in that same frame, just a little higher. There was another one there and an eye tied with red thread, which tied up hair. Like two crazy people, we put it on a plate, put some paper under it, and started to burn it. And later that night, we went to the crossroads and threw it away. After that, we also invited a priest to bless the apartment. And only after the priest came did my cat start acting normally, and my friend finally began to recover. I had heard of mystical things, of course, but I never thought I would encounter it personally. So don't tell me not to believe in mysticism after this. These stories are the testimony of people who have encountered something beyond our understanding. It seems this world is full of mysteries that we may never learn about. Have you ever had to deal with something similar? Write about it in the comments.